This is Susan C. Anthony speaking, and I welcome you to my workshop for educators, Fun with Facts. In this workshop, I'll be sharing with you ideas that made my teaching experience a lot more rewarding, and I hope will do the same for you. When kids are learning, teachers tend to enjoy teaching more and give it their best effort, which helps kids learn, and then encourages teachers, and there's an upward spiral that feeds on itself. By contrast, when kids have trouble and get frustrated, teachers are discouraged and sometimes blame themselves or feel badly, which works into a downward spiral that feeds on itself. I prepared this workshop to share some ready-to-use ideas that will hopefully get the upward spiral launched for you. This workshop hits the highlights of what I taught in a 15-hour credit class for teachers. I obviously can't cover everything there is to say about the subject in an hour. And don't think I'm recommending that you try all of these activities. Your job, while listening today, is to consider the ideas that you might consider as jigsaw puzzle pieces. Look at them. Find one or two that will fit with what you're doing right now. Keep in mind what you might be able to use in the future. Nobody should use all these ideas in a single year, not even me. Pick and choose. Prioritize as we go along. I should tell you a little about me so you know who's talking. Notice that I'm wearing sunglasses in the photo. For the most part, I do not like my picture taken, and I avoid cameras as much as possible. I'm happiest when thinking about ideas, not myself. They say there are three basic types of people: people who love ideas, people who love people, and people who love things like cars and motorcycles. Most people are a combination of all three. I'm an off-the-chart idea person. When it comes to things, fixing machines and the like, I'm hopeless. I grew up in the Colorado Rockies and rode a bus several miles to a two-room schoolhouse. Mrs. Amy was my first through third grade teacher. I didn't have access to a library until fourth grade, when someone in the community with a Denver library card would check out books and then lend them to us kids. In seventh grade, I went to a school in a little bigger town. A teacher gave us an assignment that changed my life. It was just a list of questions. She took us to the library, which was in a janitor's closet, and instructed us to use reference books there to find answers to the questions. Along about the time I found the name of the 16th Pope, it occurred to me that all the knowledge in the world was available to me in books, if I just knew where to look. That gave me a sense of power. I always wanted to pass along that insight to my own students. I ordered a class set of world almanacs for my sixth graders in the Anchorage School District and began developing activities. Almanacs were perfect because they had maps as well as a wide variety of information, all in one volume. Each child kept an almanac in his or her desk. The kids soon began pulling them out and looking up things whenever someone asked a good question in a class discussion or when there was an interesting news event. Reference books became an integral part of our classroom, as well as of the kids' lives. When I moved from 6th to 5th grade, I tried to use the same activities, but the world almanacs gave the younger kids trouble. The typeface was too small. There were decimals and other things they didn't yet understand. They had trouble finding information they wanted in charts and tables that were overloaded with information they didn't want. The activities were still great, and the kids were doing their best. The problem was the almanac. I needed a more kid-friendly almanac. I looked around but didn't find anything, so a friend encouraged me to write the book myself. It took 7 years from idea to final product, but it was worth it. Back when I was a teacher, I attended classes like this one. Some of them offered wonderful ideas, but no corresponding materials. Since I didn't have time to prepare the materials myself, many of the great ideas I learned never got used. I didn't want to do that to you. This is the kids' almanac I wrote, Facts Plus. It's packed with basic information, what I call essential information, that educated people should know or at least be familiar with. I liked using almanacs in the classroom as well as posting maps, timelines, and the like, because I could be flexible and quickly respond to kids' sparks of interest. For example, one day during math, one of my fourth graders raised his hand. He'd been thinking. He said, "You know, last week you told us that the wiggly state borders are rivers. I've been wondering what river's in the border between Idaho and Montana." In my earlier days of teaching, I might have directed him back to math, but I was ready to capture and exploit that question on the spur of the moment. I went to the map to find out, and in the process learned something I didn't even know that I didn't know. What river is it? Well, it's not a river. It's the Continental Divide, which is a natural feature and therefore wiggly. In a few seconds, we were back to math. Everyone had learned something new, including me. The activities I used with almanacs are in the Facts Plus activity book, including those I'll be sharing this coming hour. Many of the activities I had used with the World Almanacs years before, and they're generic ideas. You can use them with any reference resource. The answers in this activity book, though, are key to Facts Plus. Be creative. Extend and expand the ideas to incorporate other reference resources you have available. Hopefully, during this hour, you will memorize the 5 basic ways of organizing information, learn how to organize a learning environment to capture and exploit sparks of student interest, and go home with at least one idea you actually use. I'd appreciate your letting me know what you think that will be. I can't tell you how many classes I've gone to over the years where I did not get one thing I actually used. So that's one of my goals for you. A handout is available to download on my website, susancanthony.com. The first page you see here lists the 5 basic ways of organizing information. I hope you'll memorize these and use them to organize your classroom or learning environment using them as a theme. If you don't memorize them, you can use this as a cheat sheet. The handout also includes some ready-to-use activities from the Facts Plus activity book. These activities can be used with any reference resource, including the internet. Here, for example, are 2 timelines. The one on the left is a timeline of major events in Western history from 5000 BC to the present. I'll talk more about how to use it a little later. On the right is a blank master that can be used to create vertical timelines. I'll talk more about them later as well. Here's a ready-to-use space activity that I'll be showing you. Just a note about this, Pluto is no longer a planet. It is now called a dwarf planet, and in fact, it's not even the largest dwarf planet. It was demoted in part because of the 2005 discovery of Eris, an object in the outer solar system that is 27% more massive than Pluto. Ceres, the largest asteroid, is also now called a dwarf planet. Some astronomers still think Eris should have been promoted to planet rather than Pluto being demoted to dwarf planet. It took me 7 years to finish Facts Plus, in part because things kept changing. I thought a fact was a fact, but sources conflicted with one another. One example was Betelgeuse, the 8th brightest star in the sky. Depending on which source I used, it was anywhere between 300 and 600 light years from Earth. That is not a small difference. There's really no way I can go out and measure it for myself. I finally chose what seemed to be the most consistently correct source, the World Book Encyclopedia, and cited it. I can't guarantee that all facts in my books are correct, but I did my best. I used to love facts because I thought they were solid. I learned that they aren't as solid as I thought. One year, the Statistical Abstract reported Michigan as the 26th largest state. The next year, it was the 10th largest state. Now, what's up with that? It drove me crazy. I called around until I found the person responsible for the chart. He hemmed and hawed a bit and then told me that they had changed the definition and they now counted inland water as part of a state's area. But I digress. Why reference books? Well, for one thing, I like books. We should perhaps use the term reference resources, which includes the internet. Kids need to learn about reference resources because facts are building blocks for thinking. Some educators seem to think fact is a 4-letter word. I was criticized for emphasizing facts and memorization in the classroom. I was supposed to teach kids how to think, I was told, not bore them with facts. One of my 4th graders came to class one day astonished that a child in her Boys and Girls Club the previous afternoon had looked at a map of Alaska and identified the Alexander Archipelago, that's Alaska's panhandle, as Florida. She couldn't believe he could be so ignorant. He was a year older than her. I told the class that some people would criticize me for teaching them so many facts. She was even more astounded at that. Well, what are we supposed to learn in school then? She asked. In truth, facts help kids think. They are building blocks for thinking. People don't think in a vacuum. They need something to think about and something to think with. At certain stages of development, kids' minds soak up facts like sponges. In my experience, that's around 4th grade for most kids. I struggled all year to get 6th graders to memorize the names of the continents and oceans. 4th graders learned that in a few weeks and went on to learn a lot more. Some 4th graders even memorized the names and locations of every country in the world. Readiness has to do with how the brain develops. At different ages, different areas of the brain physically firm up or become myelinated. Until that happens, you may beat your head against a wall trying to teach kids things their brains aren't ready to learn. At certain points, kids make huge strides in certain areas. If the optimum time for learning a certain thing passes, they can still learn it, but it will be a bit harder. Another reason reference books and resources are important is that human memories are limited. Boy, do I ever notice that as I age. I wish I could plug in a few more terabytes of RAM. I keep seeing a flashing message telling me my memory is almost full and I need to delete something before the whole system crashes. We need to prioritize what needs to be committed to memory as distinct from what we can easily look up. A third reason for using reference resources is that information is growing exponentially. I read a book in the early 1990s entitled Information Anxiety that claimed that sum total of available information in the world was doubling every 5 years. That means in the 25 plus years since, there's at least 16 times as much information available to learn. 1992 was before the internet. The news is probably worse now. When I was a kid, it was possible to aspire to know a lot bigger percentage of knowledge than is possible now. The ability to use reference extends our capacity to know. Why memorize the population of Wyoming when next year it'll change anyway? A fourth reason for learning to use reference resources is that general information about a subject is often adequate in day-to-day life. If we can find specific information when and where we need it, we'll do fine. And a last reason, facts can be fun. Some kids love facts, especially boys, and often kids who aren't great readers. A mom wrote me once to order a new copy of Facts Plus because her son had been sleeping with his, and it looked like an old telephone book. For him, facts were a key to getting him enthused about learning. I sat down one day and thought, what are the 3 most important things I want kids to gain from being in my classroom? And these are the answers I came up with. If nothing else, I want to nurture the excitement of learning, build confidence through early success, and build a framework of knowledge and skills to which new learning can be connected throughout life. First, nurture the excitement of learning. Kids' questions and interests are sparks. If you build a nest in which to catch them, you can turn those sparks into fire. And the classroom setup is the key for this. Most kids start kindergarten very excited about learning, but by the time they finish 6th grade, that's often faded. How can we keep it going? One way is by setting things up to take full advantage of any sparks of interest, rather than relying totally on the curriculum. Kids can learn a lot amazingly fast when they're interested. There's too much to teach to rely totally on their interest, but when they are interested, be ready to take advantage of it. This is where it helps to have a long-range perspective. If you're clear about what you want kids to know in the long run, you can set aside the formal curriculum when they suddenly become interested in something and harness their interest to make tracks, then come back to the curriculum later. My husband gave me a magnesium fire starter thing a while ago that looks like this, so that if I ever get lost in the woods, I can build a fire and survive. It's weatherproof and generates sparks that are 5,000 degrees hot. Here are the directions for using it. Hold the fire starter so that the tip is pressing on the ground near dry grass, leaves, moss, cloth, dryer lint, paper, or whatever. Place the blade on the flint at a 45-degree angle, perpendicular to the flint, and scrape in a downward motion. Notice that you need something other than just a fire starter. You need something to catch the sparks, flammable material, dry grass, leaves, moss, or whatever. To utilize this thing, we usually build a sort of nest to receive the sparks. It might consist of tiny twigs, then dry grass, and maybe a piece of cotton soaked with Vaseline from our survival kit. When sparks hit the nest, they ignite. Then you nurture the flame and add fuel gradually until it's roaring and can keep you warm. This is an analogy. As a teacher, you want to prepare a place for the sparks of your kids' interests to fall. Then watch and wait. You can set up your classroom or learning environment to do just that. Here's Calvin generating some sparks. Why does the sun set? It's because hot air rises. The sun is hot in the middle of the day, so it rises high in the sky. In the evening, then, it cools down and sets. Why does it go from east to west? Solar wind. Dear! Why does the sky turn red as the sun sets? That's all the oxygen in the atmosphere catching fire. Where does the sun go when it sets? The sun sets in the west, in Arizona actually, near Flagstaff. Don't the people get burned up? No, the sun goes out as it sets. That's why it's dark at night. So how does the sun rise in the east if it lands in Arizona each night? Well, time for bed. I hope someday I'm as smart as Dad is. Why? What did he tell you now? Calvin's curious questions are sparks his parents or teachers could use to start a fire. If you think about it, you have no choice but to spend some of your time rowing against the current when you teach kids. Other times you row because you're in the doldrums. When you feel a breeze, hoist a sail and take a break from the hard work. When kids' interests power the educational process, the big problem becomes keeping up with them or keeping ahead of them. If you've ever been sailing, you might know how it feels to have too much sail up and a strong wind. It can be scary. My second objective was to build confidence through early success. Self-confidence is better than self-esteem. First lessons are crucial, like first impressions. Most kids need about 90% success. And you need to know what to do when you hear the words, "I can't." There's been a lot of talk in the culture about self-esteem, but I guarantee you that self-confidence is better. Self-esteem means thinking highly of yourself. Criminals have high self-esteem. They think they were born superior to the people they rob or assault. Synonyms for self-esteem include pride, arrogance, narcissism, and so on. Self-confidence, by contrast, means being confident that whatever life throws at you, you can take it on, figure it out, deal with it, and emerge victorious. It's based on the experience of having faced tough situations and conquered them. I wanted my students to gain self-confidence. From confidence, in my opinion, comes whatever is good about self-esteem. To build self-confidence, you need to be especially careful to plan first lessons about anything. First lessons are like first impressions. You never get a second chance to make a first impression. If the first time kids are exposed to fractions, for example, they succeed, they'll think, "This isn't so hard. I can learn this." From that thought comes success. By the way, most kids, and actually people of any age, need about 90% success to feel good about themselves and be encouraged to keep on trying. Some people can do with a lot less than that, but for the most part, people need 9 successes for every failure, or they want to disengage and do something else that makes them feel better about themselves. 90% is a lot. If kids have less than that in a first lesson, they'll think, "This is hard," and they'll dread coming back to it. So take time to really plan out your first lessons in any new area of study. After the first few lessons, you can be a little more flexible. It used to discourage me when kids would whine, "I can't." Then it hit me, of course they can't. If they could, I wouldn't need to teach them. If they were already able to do it. So I tell them, "I know you can't. My job is to change that so you can. Bear with me. You'll feel great once you learn to do something you couldn't do before." I have a personal story about confidence and early success. My husband and I were at our Alaska homestead one winter, and a blizzard outside just roared for days. We were stuck inside. For a while, it was great. I always bring books to read, and I rarely have time to read a book cover to cover on a regular basis. The blizzard and the below zero temperatures there continued, day after day after day. Even I started to get a bit of cabin fever. My husband suggested we play chess. This may be hard for you to believe, but I was in my mid-30s, and I had never played chess. Not ever. Dennis, by contrast, had played most of his life and sponsored a chess club when he was teaching. He taught me what the pieces were and how they had to move. I struggled along with his help. Pretty soon I started to think of good moves on my own. I felt great. But when he noticed I was doing pretty well, he had wanted to play chess from the beginning, not teach me to play. He started playing, knocking my pieces off the board with glee. I'm an adult, but I wanted to cry. I must confess that I've not played chess since. Early success makes a huge difference for everyone in how much effort they're willing to put into learning something new. My third objective, you might remember, was to build a framework in my students' minds to which new information could be added throughout life. Disorganized information can impede learning. Learning involves retrieval as well as storage, and the more ways new knowledge can be connected, the better. I once heard a definition of an educated person as someone to which anything new they encounter can be related to something they already know. That made me think about how I process new information. The first thing I do is relate it to what I already know. In the chess example, I related chess to checkers, which I already knew, and noted what was the same and what was different. Think about the incredible store of knowledge in a room full of filing cabinets. Then picture all those documents strewn around on the floor, mixed together. The same amount of information is there, organized or disorganized, but accessing it is a whole lot harder when it's disorganized. It can be impossible. When I started school, my brain was rather empty. It was kind of like a fallow field, ready to be sown with facts and ideas. By contrast, kids today have been exposed to a tremendous amount of information by the time they start school. There's a lot in their brains, but it's scattered, disorganized, and hard to retrieve. Which is better? I think it's probably better to have an empty brain ready to learn than a brain full of disorganized information. Disorganized information can be a liability and actually impede a person's ability to think and learn. Learning involves retrieval as well as storage. Having a fact in your brain somewhere, but not being able to find it when you need it, is almost worse than not having it to start with. An analogy might be a house full of junk. As far as organization is concerned, it's almost easier to start with an empty house than to start with a house full of junk. With an empty house, there's no backlog. You can deal with things one at a time as they come in. The more ways new information can be connected to what a person already knows, the easier it is to access. Think about seeing someone at a grocery store that you recognize. Your mind goes into action to try to figure out who it is. It searches people from work, people from church, your kids' friends' parents, your kids' friends' friends, and so on until it gets a hit. You might not even be conscious of the search as you continue shopping, but at some point you might think, I know who that is. The more connections, the faster the search. Make it an objective to help your kids connect new knowledge to what they already know in as many ways as you can. We'll talk more about how to do that in this workshop. People often assume that other people already know what they already know because their background information is, by definition, in the background. Nothing could be further from the truth. Others may not have the same background information we do. One of the purposes of education is to transfer to the new generation the background information One of the purposes of education is to transfer to new generations the background information older people in the culture share. The background information that a person brings to anything he reads or hears makes a huge difference in his comprehension. For example, I might say to you, last winter I took a vacation to Baja. Notice what you just thought. What came to mind? For most people, it's a long, skinny peninsula. But for you, depending on your background, it might include memories from a cruise you took, a fishing charter, whatever. Anything you personally know about Baja. If you speak Spanish, you might recall that Baja means low or below, and that Baja California is below California. That's an example of background information. Your kids don't necessarily have the background information you have. You need to develop their fund of background information. Think again of a filing cabinet. As teachers, you may have a real filing cabinet with drawers labeled reading, spelling, math, social studies, science, and so on. As you come across something you might want to use someday, you can put it in the drawer. Once you have a lot of stuff, you organize the science stuff into categories like biology, chemistry, geology, and so forth. You might think of those categories as labels on Pendaflex folders. When you have a lot of stuff in one folder, biology for example, you might create subfolders such as botany and zoology. Building a framework to which new learning can be connected throughout life means creating in your students' minds a sort of filing cabinet with labeled drawers and folders. They may be empty, but they provide a place to put information as it's learned. In the old days, when I was a kid, I had lots of time for reflection. Lots of time for my mind to chew on, organize, and connect what I had learned. Now, that's not the case. Everything comes at us so fast. Teachers now need to make a concerted effort to help kids connect with their learning to what they already know. Otherwise, their minds will be like a filing cabinet with documents scattered all over the place and mixed, leaving them with no easy way to retrieve anything. Now I want to talk about classroom setup. How can you organize your learning environment in such a way that it's ready to capture the sparks of kids' interests and questions? I was amazed to learn that there are 5 and only 5 basic ways to organize information. Try now to think of as many as you can. I'll pause to give you a little time to think. Here they are. Information can be organized alphabetically, by time, by place, by category, or by continuum. Almost everyone thinks of alphabetical organization. Think of a few reference resources that are organized alphabetically: the dictionary, encyclopedia, telephone book, index, and so on. More books than you immediately think of are organized by time, including fiction. Fictional stories start at a point in time and go through a middle to an end, with events ordered by time. Even when a book begins with a flashback to a situation at the end, it's basically organized according to time. What else? You might think about history books, chronicles, or timelines. What reference resources are organized by place? You might think of maps, atlases, and travel guides. Social studies texts are often organized by place as well. How about category? Yellow pages are an example. They break down businesses according to the category and then alphabetize within categories. Almanacs are organized by category as are cookbooks. The last way of organizing information is by continuum. You might have listed numerical, which means basically the same thing. Race scores are organized by continuum, with the fastest runner at the top and the slower runners on down. Another example might be a list of kids in a group arranged from oldest to youngest. There's a great story about a man named Abdul Qasim Ismail, the scholarly Grand Vizier of Persia in the 10th century. He had a library of 117,000 handwritten books, each extremely valuable. Remember that movable type wasn't invented until the 1400s. When Abdul Qasim Ismail traveled as a warrior and statesman, he took all of his books with him. They were carried on 400 camels trained to walk in alphabetical order. His camel driver librarians could put their hands instantly on any book their master requested. His books were organized. The information in them was accessible. I can't emphasize too strongly the value of having information organized. How you choose to organize information is important, as this cartoon illustrates. I use these 5 basic ways to organize information in my classroom and set it up to catch sparks of student interest and enthusiasm. I used alphabet cards, timeline from 5000 BC to AD 2050, maps of the world and the US and your state, color-coded categories, and a number line. Here's how I did that. I posted a set of handwriting alphabet cards. This has not only helped kids remember how to form the letters when writing, it helped them when we were learning to alphabetize and use indexes and dictionaries. The kids could just glance up to check whether P comes before or after R, for example. As for time, I posted a large timeline that extended across one whole wall. It started about 5000 BC when prehistory turned into history and extends to AD 2050, a few years from now. It's labeled in increments of 500 years, and I used National Geographic photos to illustrate an outline of major periods and events. Ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, birth of Christ, Middle Ages, Columbus, and the USA began. I'll talk more about how I use this a little bit later. Posting maps was a big breakthrough in my teaching career. One reason I wanted to be a teacher when I was a kid was I loved doing bulletin boards. When I became a teacher, bulletin boards became the bane of my life until I decided that kids should have maps in front of them all the time. That took most of my bulletin board space, leaving only one or two that needed to be changed and refreshed. We used the maps on an almost daily basis, and the kids learned to connect everything they learned to a map. I posted a very large map of the world, a large map of the United States, and a huge map of Alaska before school began, and I didn't take them down until school ended. It might be a good idea to post a large map of Europe as well, because all the countries there are so small on a world map. The difference between category and continuum is a little confusing to most people. Think of category as organizing by color and continuum as organizing by number. One way I used category was to color code school subjects. Reading was red, spelling was yellow, math was blue, etc. The kids each had colored pocket folders in which I taught them to keep all related paperwork. Kids aren't naturally organized, have you noticed? Even adults aren't naturally organized, and a huge amount of everyone's time gets wasted as a consequence. Take time when kids are young to train them how to organize their stuff. That alone might make a difference over their lifetime, and their future spouses will thank you. For continuum, I posted a huge number line extending from 0 to 1,000. We used it when appropriate, often in math. When it comes to rounding, it's easier to see which 100 or 1,000 is closer than it is to conceptualize it. I also kept as many reference books in my classroom as I could. Dictionaries, almanacs, thesauri, sets of encyclopedias, world atlas, globe, calendar, telephone books, etc. I borrowed a class set of dictionaries when I taught about dictionaries. Each child had an almanac in his or her own desk, a world almanac until I wrote my kids' almanac, Facts Plus. I had thesauri, you might say thesauruses, but it's a Latin word, so thesauri is the correct way to pluralize. One year, the World Book had a great incentive program for kids reading. Kids gathered sponsors and pledged to read so many books, and the World Book matched the amounts. My fourth graders earned a copy of just about everything World Book publishes, a set of World Book encyclopedias, childcraft, atlases, dictionaries, and so on. It's great to have those basic reference books right at your fingertips, and they don't need to be the latest edition. These days, of course, most people look to the internet, but let me just put in a word for World Book. You can't trust everything you read on the internet. Our granddaughter's teacher had a huge globe in the classroom the first year we went through the Panama Canal. I remember how big Megan's eyes got when I showed her where we would be going on the globe. Years later, she went with us on the same trip in the opposite direction. I think every learning environment should have at least one globe. Our school had a classroom set of globes, and I did lots of instruction using them. Other reference resources to have around and teach kids to use include calendars, telephone books, cookbooks, and catalogs. Here's how I taught kids the dictionary in alphabetical order. It was a popular activity and fun for everyone. I'll talk through the points on the slide rather than read them. I borrowed an identical set of dictionaries from a library, enough for me and every one of my students. The first day, I just let kids survey and explore. Dictionaries have a lot of interesting information before and after the main section. A lot of people don't know that. I asked kids to find and tell me what they found in the dictionary other than words and definitions. The next day I named a letter, any letter. Students located any page with that word, with words beginning with that letter. This is easier with tabbed dictionaries, of course. If dictionaries are not tabbed, kids find the letter by determining about how far along it is in the alphabet, the first third, second third, or third third of the alphabet. Open the dictionary about where you guess it might be. Look at the posted alphabet cards to see if you should move backward or forward to find the letter you want, and then zero in on that letter by moving backwards or forward again and again until you have guide words with the letter you're seeking. When kids get good at that, I open my dictionary and write one guide word on the board. Or I can just say it if it's easy to spell. Their assignment is to find the page with that guide word as quickly as possible and raise their hand. We continue this activity for a few minutes each day until kids are competent and fast. Whiz kids are encouraged to coach and encourage other classmates. The next step is to have them find a page with the guide word as before and then find a word on that page that is not a guide word. Again, they learn to guess about where they think it might be, check the alphabet cards to see if they need to look before or after the word in front of them, and then zero in on the target. When kids are good at that, the teacher can write any word from the dictionary on the board. Kids race to find the words. Don't call on the first student who finds it, but acknowledge that child non-verbally. Give other kids time to find it, and when most are done, ask the first child or anyone else to tell you the page and the column that the word is in. The final activity is 10 words in 10 minutes. Kids each get a piece of paper like this. The teacher says, ready, set, go, and kids find each word and write the page and column number. They note how much time it took them to do all 10 words. When they find 10 words correctly in 10 minutes, they pass. I award them for reaching a mastery standard. The fastest students then go on to better their times. With any time left after they finish their worksheet, they can encourage and help other kids who find the exercise more difficult. Eventually, almost every child could locate 10 words in 10 minutes in a dictionary and win an award. I think it's important to set objective but reasonable standards for children to strive towards. Even kids who don't reach the standard, and most do, will do much better than they would have without a standard. When someone doesn't reach the standard by the time we move on to something else, I call them aside and tell them that my objective was that they learn to find words in the dictionary. Being able to find them fast was secondary. Even if they didn't finish in 10 minutes, they did know how to find words in a dictionary, and I was proud of them. Everybody's different. The 10 minutes thing is just a game. Even kids who didn't reach the standard, and they were rare, knew that they knew how to do this. That's what I really wanted. I already mentioned that I post a big timeline on the wall extending from 5000 BC to AD 2050. Early in the school year, I do an overview of the timeline, acquainting kids broadly with the march of world history. I visited the pyramids in Greece, so I show my slides. They often get really excited and bring books and videos from home. One teacher told me she tried this and the kids got so excited about it that she had to put the rest of her social studies program on hold for a while because she couldn't keep up with the kids and they were so excited that she didn't want to stop them. That's a good problem for a teacher to have. Whenever possible, you want kids to provide the energy. Sometimes you end up hanging on for dear life, but it's better than trying to push them to move along. I wanted kids to commit to memory, the timeline, so they could visualize it in their minds long after they left my classroom. I tested them week after week using the exact same test, the timeline that's in your handout. Keep in mind that all they had to do was look up at the timeline on the wall to get a perfect score. I challenged them to fill it in without looking, and most of them accepted the challenge. I didn't record anything but their final and best score. A breakthrough in my teaching career came when I realized I could use the same test week after week if it was something I really wanted kids to know. It's okay to let them try and try again until they get it right. The timeline became an integral part of my classroom. I remember hosting a guest speaker once who talked about something that happened in 1608. All the kids looked up at the timeline to fit what he was saying into the context of what they already knew about world history. You'll do kids a huge favor by guiding them in the process of connecting new learning to what they already know in as many ways as you can. In this hurry-up, rush world, there's not time to let information and ideas cook or organize them gradually. Here's the test I mentioned, the one I gave week after week. On top, they wrote the numbers 5000 BC, 4500 BC, etc. BC means before Christ. Notice that we count time backwards before the birth of Christ. Also notice there's no year 0. In fact, when the calendar we used was created, people didn't know exactly when Christ was born. They just guessed. It turns out they were off by a few years. AD means Anno Domini, which is Latin for in the year of our Lord. Anno is related to the word annual. Some people who don't believe in Christ prefer BCE, meaning before the Common Era, and CE, meaning Common Era. Where the spaces below are attached to the timeline, as at 1 AD in the last two, the event happened on a specific date. Where they're not connected, it happened over a period of time that the space stretches. So the first space below the timeline represents the time, the era of ancient Egypt. The next space represents ancient Greece, and the next ancient Rome. Christ was born during the time of ancient Rome. A way to help kids remember this is the three ancient kingdoms, just by coincidence, are in alphabetical order: Egypt, Greece, Rome. The only other era on this timeline is the Middle Ages, castles and kings. Then there's 1492, when Columbus sailed the ocean blue. And the last event on the timeline is the USA began. I have kids memorize that date, July 4th, 1776. In effect, this timeline gives kids labels for drawers in their mental file cabinet. As they learn new information, have them practice finding the right drawer in which to file it, and then give them opportunities to retrieve it and refile it until they either know it or know exactly where to find it. You also want them to connect what they learn to places when appropriate. Post a world map, United States map, and a map of your state throughout the year. Relate what is read and learned throughout the year to the map, fiction included. Practice 5 minutes a day, starting with continents. Add a few new geographical place names per week. Test each week on all memorized so far. And then I'll tell you about the map game. This is where the big maps come in. No matter what kids read, learn, or see, if there's a place involved, find it on the map. This includes television programs, movies, documentaries, fiction, everything. Adults do this automatically in their heads, and they often assume kids do too. But geographic literacy is far worse than it once was because geography is not taught as it once was. There's a college professor who doesn't pass his students until they can draw a map of the entire world from memory. Some of my fourth graders challenged themselves to learn the names of every country in the world, though I didn't require them to do that. The kids in my fourth grade classroom could not get enough of maps. The 5 minutes a day thing mentioned on the slide usually happens for me during times when kids were moving around, getting ready or coming in from recess, getting settled after lunch, etc. I would stand at the world map and say, "What's the name of this continent?" Pointing to it, "North America." "Yes, everybody say North America." "How about this continent?" "South America." "Everybody say South America." "What about this one?" "North America." "This one?" "South America." "What about this one?" "Europe." And so on until they've heard and correctly pronounced the names of all 7 continents. The next day, in a similar getting settled time, we review. I point to the continent, they say the name if they know it. I say the name and they all repeat after me. On the next, back to the first, on and on, until all the kids are settled and ready for a regular lesson. The next week we add oceans, and every week a few more places, always reviewing the ones before. When they know a lot of place names, we do a map game, which I'll show you in a minute. Here's a test for the first week. Their job is to label the continents correctly spelled. It's half off if they don't spell them correctly because all they have to do is copy the spellings that are right in front of them. Here's a test for week 2. They have to label continents and oceans. Interestingly, some of my 6th graders never mastered continents and oceans, despite my best efforts, while all 4th graders did, and were hungry for more. It has to do with readiness and the brain's firming up in certain areas at certain times. Kids are more open to some kinds of learning at one stage than at another. The third week, I just added a couple more place names because continents and oceans are so important. I taught them the Atacama Desert, which is in northern Chile. Partly because not many people know about it, though it's the driest place in the world, with no rain for 400 years. Kids who like facts love knowing things that other people don't know. We continued with major rivers, like the Nile, Mississippi, Amazon, major mountain ranges, the Himalayas, Rockies, Alps, and so on, and then moved on to a blank world map with country outlines. Kids who learned the names of countries all the kids would learn the names of 5 key countries per continent before moving to a United States map, and finally a map of Alaska. Some kids wanted to learn the names of all countries in the world, as I mentioned before. Once kids knew a good number of place names, we started the map game. It was popular all year long. All the place names they knew were on the slips of paper in a can. Place names they hadn't studied were on colored slips of paper in a different can and were worth double points. Kids divided into teams. A child who comes to the front of the room and draws a card, easy or hard, his choice, has 15 seconds to locate the place on the map. Think about it. You may not be able to draw a map from memory that includes Zambia in the right place, but you know that Zambia is in Africa somewhere. You can scan the map and find it pretty quickly. Some of my kids wanted to learn everything on the map and spent their spare time playing the map game with each other. I let them add additional cards if they wanted. In a homeschool situation, moms sometimes put a world map under a clear plastic tablecloth. Give each child cards with names appropriate for their ages and have them work as fast as they can to put as many cards in the right places as they can. There are lots of ways to play the map game and lots of ways to spin off from maps into learning about people and places. I already talked about color coding school subjects. Another way to use category is to have kids memorize basic categories in any area of study to use as file folder labels in their mental filing cabinets. For example, the 3 types of rocks: igneous, sedimentary, and metamorphic, or the 4 types of clouds: cirrus, stratus, cumulus, and nimbus. The facts game is a way to review and reinforce what they've learned in the past. You don't want kids to think that once they pass a test, they can delete everything they learned so far and move on to something new. Hold them accountable for remembering the most important facts and concepts you've taught them for the rest of their lives. Be sure to incorporate some type of mixed and extended review. The facts game is a way to do that. The first time I used the facts game, I wrote 100 questions. I want all kids to be able to answer these questions from memory. They're things like, at what temperature does water freeze? Who is the president? What are the 3 parts of an atom? How many inches are in a foot? I had kids design their own games, and the picture here shows a board game that some of my students designed. Other teams used other formats, such as quiz show games. You can use any game format or game board you like, with the variation that each child has to draw a card and answer a question before taking his turn. Just an aside here, one mom told me that the great idea she planned to take home and use was the idea of putting games like this in file folders rather than on poster board, so it'd be easier to fold up and store. If you finish this workshop with one idea you actually use, whatever it might be, your taking an hour to listen to me will have been worthwhile. Hopefully you'll find more than one thing you like, but I can't even tell you how many classes I've attended from which I got nothing useful at all. Back to the facts game. As I said, you can use any game board or game format. I prepared 100 cards asking basic information that all children should be able to answer. They're all in the Facts Plus activity book, but of course you can write your own cards. Add cards to the stack as you teach with key information or categories children need to memorize. Color code cards for different levels so that all children can play together at their own level. The facts game provides extended and mixed practice. That's what's so powerful about it. Once kids master a fact, you can pull that card out and then mix it back in occasionally. One mom told me that she ended every week with the facts game. Her kids loved it, and it was a reward for them. She could be confident they were reviewing and remembering what they had learned that week and in the past. You might want to number cards and make an answer sheet in case someone's mind goes blank and they need review. Kids can separate out cards they miss, and you can then address them and review the next week. Continuum has to do with math. There are lots of ways to work math into all areas of the curriculum using almanacs and reference resources. Facts Plus, for example, can be a source of numbers that kids can use to write their own word problems. I just want to show you a few other activities I use to teach kids how to use reference books. This is a scavenger hunt with questions such as find the name of a famous tunnel in Japan. Kids go to the index of Facts Plus, find either Japan or tunnel, find the chart of famous tunnels, and then write an answer. Some questions can have more than one correct answer. At the bottom are challenge questions for speedy kids. I have to tell you one little story about one of the challenge questions. The question originally was, find the name of a president who died in office. Kids were supposed to find the chart of presidents and eliminate any who lived beyond their term of office. One child came up in exasperation and said, "Well, I know President Kennedy died, but he wasn't in the office." I laughed and changed the phrasing of the question to make it more clear. It's now, find the name of a president who died during his term of office. Kids can be your best teachers. This worksheet gives kids practical practice in using a perpetual calendar. There are only 14 possible calendars, 7 for regular years and 7 for leap years. When you know which calendar goes with which year, you can figure out on what day of the week anything happened. Kids like figuring out on which day of the week they were born, for example. I loved the perpetual calendar when I was a kid. In this activity, they used the index in FACS+ to look up when things happened and then refer to the perpetual calendar to find the day of the week. Here's a crossword puzzle, same idea. Kids use the index to find answers to the questions in order to complete the crossword. When people first open the FACS+ activity book, most turn directly to pages that look like this and wonder what's up with that. As a general rule, from anywhere you open the activity book, just page backward to find the pages with directions for the activity. Those are the pages with dark black headers. In this case, there's a question relating to each day of the year. The answers can all be found in FACS+. I tried to choose the most interesting thing that happened that day so kids would hopefully become interested and want to learn more. I made a different set of colored cards for each month. Obviously, you can give kids a question to answer every day, but another way to use these cards is to play a variation of bingo using pages from an old calendar. Kids playing the game each draw a card for a day of the month and then look up the answer in FACS+. They note the answer on a piece of paper or on the calendar itself and put an X on the day using a colored marker with different colors for different kids. They then take another card and continue. The first person with 4 X's in a row wins. Now let's think back to Calvin and discuss how to answer some of those great questions he asked his dad. Usually I start each school year with a mini unit on space, just because it's fun and it wows kids. I'll talk through the points on this slide. Before beginning any unit of study, it's a good idea to have the kids brainstorm what they already know about the subject and what questions they have. You might list what they know and what they want to know on a big piece of paper that you can post while kids study the unit, or fold up and take out afterwards to see if there's anything left that wasn't covered. Of course, some things that they think they know aren't really true. List them anyway and see if they can find out that they're wrong during the course of study. For a long time, everybody knew that the earth was flat, but it never actually was flat. Secondly, I teach them how to research and read a chart. And next, they make their own solar system using templates. You can do this with the page in your handout. Make 3 copies of the master for each child, 1 for Jupiter, 1 for Saturn, and 1 for the rest of the planets. Have the kids look up the planets and color them so that they all look like pictures of them. Be sure to put a big red spot on Jupiter, for example. Cut out the planets and put them in order on a long black piece of paper. Color first, then cut. Except for Jupiter and Saturn, of course. Next, I had them find more information on each planet. I finished with a bang by showing them the size of the sun to scale, then pretending to put the sun into a shrinking machine until it was very small. There are details on the handout for that. And then I took everyone outside to pace out the distance between the planets on that scale. It was mind-blowing, and the kids loved it. Here's a copy of the FACS+ chart on the planets. So to start with, I'd ask questions such as, how many moons does Saturn have? 25. How far from the sun is Mercury? 36 million miles. How fast does Uranus travel in its orbit? 4 miles per second, and so on. After they did well with that, I'd ask questions that require some comparison. Which planet is furthest from the sun? Which planet is largest? Which planet has the highest temperature? Which planet has the shortest day? And so on. Now a question for grown-ups. Which planet has a day that's longer than its year? That would be Venus, which has a day lasting 243 Earth days and a year lasting only 225 Earth days. Venus actually rotates backwards. You can probably tell that I think facts are fun. Each child then gets a card with a planet's name written on it. They fill it out. Those who finish first do another card. Once everyone is done filling in information, they copy the paragraph in their best handwriting onto an index card. And I choose the best of the cards for each planet and make a hall display with someone's solar system and a card for each planet. I finished the mini unit by asking kids how big they think the sun would be if the planets were the size of the cutouts. I actually made a 6-inch diameter sun with yellow paper, but one could use chalk to draw a sun on concrete or show a picture like this. Notice that in the photo above, you can barely see the Earth. It's so small. Then we shrink the sun, as I mentioned before, and go outside to paste the distance between the sun and the planets. You might want to set up stakes or use chalk on a sidewalk to show the distances. There is a whole lot of space in space. Here's an activity I did to guide kids into higher level thinking. Inventions. Each student researches dates for a series of related inventions: transportation, communication, medicine, and so on. Place the inventions on vertical timelines according to category and hang the timelines side by side to look for patterns within and between the timelines. Here's a list of inventions relating to transportation. The child looks up the year each thing was invented. Next, they make a long vertical timeline and place inventions on it next to the year they were invented. The two timelines shown above here are on clothing and transportation. You can use the master in your handout to make timelines or tape together masters from the Facts Plus activity book that have dates already on them. Finally, have the kids try to find inventions that led to other inventions. For example, the bicycle preceded the motorcycle. The internal combustion engine preceded the automobile, as well as the motorcycle. Look for relationships within the timeline. A really nice thing about vertical timelines is you can hang them side by side on a wall, as shown in this photo, and look for relationships across timelines. The modern steam engine, for example, shows up on both clothing and transportation timelines, and inventions based on that appear in both timelines. One homeschool mom loved the idea of vertical timelines. She had kids write things on a timeline that had stretched around the kitchen for years, and there were so many things on it that it had become illegible. She went home and had kids categorize what was on the timeline: European history, United States history, science, etc. The kids then made vertical timelines that took up a wall in the hall. One suggestion: you can use medium-sized colored Post-it notes for labels. That way you can later move, remove, recategorize, or reorganize them. Cut off all but the part with the glue on the Post-it note. Write the invention and slap it up. That way you won't have to worry too much about mistakes or overloading timelines so they become too hard to read. Use as many vertical timelines side by side as you want. You can make a timeline for books you read and another one for movies you see. Be creative. Timelines are a great way to help kids organize information they learn and put it into context. Now on to place. I remember the first time I had 6th graders do country reports. The librarian had come to the classroom every day for a couple of weeks to introduce kids to a variety of reference resources. But the first day we all went to the library, they were lost. Every hand was up. Both the librarian and I ran ourselves ragged trying to answer the most elementary questions on things we thought they already knew. Obviously, it seemed to me, they needed more hands-on experience with reference books in a more controlled situation. They needed more early success to be ready to work independently. So I bought a class set of world almanacs and made a chart for each continent. Each child filled out one of the charts and then made a corresponding graph. Once that was done, we posted the best examples of each graph and made comparisons. Kids were amazed to compare population densities of different continents, for example. Questions started flowing about why things are the way they are. Why is one country so different from another? By the time I turned the kids loose in the library, they were raring to go. Using the graphs, I had kids look for patterns. Are there correlations? Countries high in one area tending to be high in another, or reverse correlations, countries high in one area tending to be low in another. Can you think of a reason why it might be that way. Kids came up with hypotheses about why things might be the way they are, and then eagerly sought information to check their hypotheses. I generally stop the activity right there, but you can go on and have kids color maps to illustrate statistical patterns if you like. Here's a chart for South America. The countries listed are listed on down the left there, and the statistical indicators are listed across the top. Column 1 is population growth rate, how fast the population is growing. Column 2 is population density, how crowded it is. Then per capita GDP, which is how much money on average people make. The average life expectancy, how long people live on average, and the infant mortality rate, how many babies die in their first year of life. Kids use the country's statistics at Facts Plus to fill in the chart. These are South American graphs in the order I mentioned above. Population growth rate on the left, population density, per capita GDP in the middle, average life expectancy, and infant mortality rate. Here's the graph of population growth rate. I have kids look for the highest and the lowest, as well as see if there are any other patterns they notice. On this graph, you might notice that the second bar, which is red, is the highest. The next to last bar, which is green, is the lowest. This is per capita GDP, a number related to how much money people have on average. Again, look for highest and lowest. You might notice that the second one, which is red, is relatively short, though it's not the shortest. And the second to last one, which is green, is relatively high, but not the highest. This is infant mortality rate, how many babies die before their first birthday. The red one is the highest, and the second to last green one is low, though it's not the lowest. Here's the average life expectancy. The second one, which is red, is relatively low. The green one, second to last, is relatively high. The red one has relatively high growth rate, and this is the red one, second from the left there. Relatively high growth rate, low per capita GDP, high infant mortality rate, and low life expectancy. The green one, second to last there, has relatively low growth rate, high per capita GDP, low infant mortality rate, and high life expectancy. Not knowing which country is which of those two countries do you think would be the better place to live? The green one, right? Are there any correlations or reverse correlations? High infant mortality rate, for example, is correlated to low life expectancy. What factors might make one country healthier or wealthier than another? Have the kids look on some maps. What differences can you see between the countries? Hopefully you can see that you can get kids into higher level thinking without much effort when you use statistics. Because you're probably wondering, the one that's red is Bolivia, and the second to last one that's green is Uruguay. I want to leave you with one last activity that I dreamed up while traveling in Africa. I loved getting my passport stamped. We actually had to go to an American consulate in Africa to get more pages taped in. It wasn't all border stamps. As we traveled across the Sahara, they recorded our presence and stamped our passports in every little town. If anyone turns up missing, they find the last place they checked in and start the search from there. While in Luxor, Egypt, I listed all the things we learned that made travel easier and dreamed up this activity. I started it as a class activity and later challenged kids who were interested to work on earning stamps for their passport at home or in class when they finished their assigned work. We started together with everyone filling out a passport application. I have a form in the activity book, but better yet would be to get a real passport application at the post office and fill it out. I taught kids about time and currency conversions using worksheets that are in the activity book, and together we, quote, visited Mexico by finding answers to a list of questions, which you can tailor to the ages and ability levels of your kids. Then each child got a passport and a special folder. In the folder were charts needed for doing time and currency conversions, as well as a list of questions and challenges, such as the best time to call your family at home is 8 p.m. their time. What time should you call from your country? What countries border this country? And so on. All the questions on the worksheet can be answered with just the Facts Plus Almanac, but I would encourage you to choose or make up your own questions based on the ability of your kids and utilizing all the resources they have available. For example, have them find the country on a globe, search for information on the internet, etc. Maybe start with just a few questions and add a question for each new country to ensure early success. Be creative with this activity and make it your own. When kids complete the activity, they get a stamp in their passport and they can color in the country on the map inside the folder. Here's how it looks. The passport application is on the left there. The circle thing is what kids use to do time conversions. The folder has a world map taped inside and statistical information for the United States and the child's state to compare with the country being investigated, thereby incorporating math. Some kids loved this activity and traveled the world. Others weren't as interested as their teachers or parents thought they would be. That's the way it is with teaching. Part of the aim and part of the art of teaching is to try different things and keep trying. Find out what gets your kids excited and roll with that. Use their interests like wind in your sails. Sometimes you have to beat against the wind because they need to learn things whether they want to or not. But other times their interest can provide enough motive power that you can sit back and enjoy the ride. So to review, these were my objectives. That you would memorize the 5 basic ways to organize information. Think of those real quickly here, as many as you can. It would be alphabetical, time, place, category, and continuum. That you would learn how to organize a learning environment to capture and exploit sparks of student interest, and that you would go home with at least one idea that you actually use, and I would love to know what that is. One thing we talked about earlier is how the amount of information in the world is doubling every 5 years. It's like we're on a treadmill that keeps moving faster and faster and faster until we're hanging on for dear life. For the most part, everyone is too busy to rest, reflect, imagine, or play. Let me suggest, as one last idea, that you schedule time for reflection into your week. Give your kids' imaginations time to gaze at the clouds and just imagine. You have to push back against the culture to make that happen, but it can make a big difference in the long run for your kids' ability to think. When I read this from Through the Looking Glass, I couldn't believe how it described modern life. Lewis Carroll wrote it all the way back in the 1870s. How could he know what we would be up against today? Alice and the Queen had been running like mad when Alice discovered they were still under the very same tree. Why, I do believe we've been under this tree all the time. Everything is just as it was. Of course it is, said the Queen. What would you have it? Well, in our country, said Alice, still panting a little, you'd generally get to somewhere else if you ran very fast for a long time, as we've been doing. A slow sort of country, said the Queen. Now here, you see, it takes all the running you can do just to keep in the same place. If you want to get somewhere else, you must run at least twice as fast. With that, I leave you, hoping that you're now better equipped to nurture your kids' excitement of learning, build confidence through early success, and build a framework of knowledge and skills to which they can connect new learning throughout their lives.